Okay, Chairman, we're now live on YouTube, so we can start the meeting when you're ready. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and a warm welcome to a virtual meeting of the Major Applications Planning Subcommittee for HS2 of the London Borough of Hillingdon. This is a virtual meeting that is also being broadcast simultaneously on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. My name is Councillor Steve Tuckwell, and I am the chairman of this evening's meeting. First and foremost, I think members and officers present on this evening's meeting are very well versed in the online housekeeping, which is around mobile phones and microphones, but I won't go through the full list because I think everybody is very aware of that. As we are in a virtual format, I do need to do an attendance roll call for both officers and members. I will call your name, and if you could just indicate that you are present. So I'll start off this evening with the Vice Chairman, Councillor Lavery.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. The Labour lead this evening, Councillor Duncan.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Brightman.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hagger.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Oswell.
Thank you. Present, Chairman.
Thank you. And Councillor Morgan.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I'm present.
Thank you. Liz, is that a full house of members this evening?
It is, yes. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. I have to do the same for the officers that are supporting this evening's proceedings, so I'll start with our Specialist Planning Officer this evening, Ian Thine.
Yes, present.
Thank
Chairman,
you. Our Head of Planning, James Roger.
I'm present, Chairman.
Thank you. Our Democratic Services Officer this evening, Liz Penny.
Present, Chairman.
And our Borough Solicitor, Raj Allah.
Present, Chairman.
Good evening. Okay, Liz, is that all the supporting officers this evening?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Okay. Just a few bits to run through in terms of technical meeting control. If any councillor leaves the virtual meeting partway through for a period of time through a lost connection, I will continue the meeting unless we are not quorate, which is 3 councillors. Importantly to note, if any councillor does leave the meeting for a period of time, they will not be able to vote on the agenda, the item that they were not present on. Okay, that's the housekeeping and attendance arrangements dealt with. We can now start to move on to the main body of the agenda. So we'll start with agenda item number 1 this evening. Apologies for absence. Liz?
No apologies this evening, Chairman.
Okay. Agenda item 2, any declarations of interest in the matters before this evening's meeting? I'm looking at the screen. I'm getting lots of shakes of the head, so no declarations there. Liz. Agenda item 3 we'll move on to, which is to receive and agree the minutes of the last meeting dated the 24th of June. Can we take those as agreed? Lots of thumbs up there, Liz. So we can now move on to agenda item 4, which is to confirm that there have been no matters notified in advance or urgent this evening, which then can take us to agenda item 5, which is to also to confirm that all items this evening are in part 1, which is the public, discussed in public. We have 2 items this evening, and they will be taken in the order published on the agenda. Okay, that's the prelude to this evening's meeting, so we can now get into the applications themselves. And we'll start with agenda item 6, which is the Ecological Mitigation Site, Harbour Road, Harefield. And at that point, I can now pass over to Ian to present this application. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Chairman. Just going to present my screen now. Hopefully you can all see that. You see that, Chairman?
All good.
Oh, good. Thank you. Right. So agenda item 6, Ecological Mitigation Site, Harbour Road in Harefield. So this is an application for the construction of a bat house, a brick-built, purpose-built house for bats. The location is the little red dot on your screen there, just south of Dews Lane, west of Harville Road. In detail, it's at the foot of some ecological mitigation work that has already been planted up, and just to the west of 2 mitigation ponds, which was part of an earlier Schedule 17 application quite some time ago now. Those works are now virtually complete, and the darker green blob area is now planted and in growth. So the grey structure at the bottom of the screen, circled there, is the proposed bat house. To put this into context, the reason that there is going to be a bat house is just at the bottom of Dews Lane are several structures. These are the Dews cottages. Unfortunately, these will be demolished to make way for the Colne Valley Viaduct. You can just about see Howick at the bottom of the Dews Lane there. These brick-built structures were thought and considered to be of appropriate habitat for bats. So to offset the loss of these, the bat house is being proposed. So that's the context for why there will be a bat house. The location was chosen because it's near the woodland and broadly in the same foraging area and foraging scope of the bats that would use these structures. A little bit more detail of the bat house itself. It's a fairly sizable structure considering bats are fit in the palm of your hand, but it's considered to be an appropriate structure by HS2. So in general, the consensus amongst officers is that the proposal is relatively straightforward. The bat house has been located for good reasons. It's mitigation to offset some of the harm of HS2 works. And as a consequence, officers have no reason to object to this proposal. All the information was submitted. There was initially some archaeological information that was missing, but that was subsequently provided, and GLASS, Greater London Archaeological Advisory Service, provided their positive support for the proposals, having seen that information. So not a lengthy presentation tonight, Chairman, because it's fairly straightforward. Officers deem it's necessary to have this house. It's in an area tucked out of the way behind the woodland, and as a consequence, based on the allowance, based on what's allowed for by the Act, there's no reason to cite it elsewhere. The harm is relatively minimal, and officer recommendation is approval, subject to the informative before you. The proposed development includes measures relating to protected species. The proposals must be designed in accordance with any relevant protected species licence and ecological standards for the project. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, no, thank you for that, Ian. Before I open it up for members to discuss this application, it's always good to bring Raj in to give his perspective from a legal angle, as we know we're dealing with HS2 and various pieces of legislation. So Raj, any views from you on this one?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman, and a very good evening to everyone. I'll keep my comments relatively brief. I mean, as this is a very straightforward application which has been submitted by High Speed 2 Limited under paragraph 2 of Schedule 17 of the High Speed 2 Act. Now, as you will all be aware, the Court of Appeal issued a judgment back in July of this year in relation to a Schedule 17 paragraph 3 application dating back to 2018, and the Court of Appeal offered some very useful guidance to qualifying authorities as to how Schedule 17 should be interpreted. And the Court of Appeal made it very clear that local authorities are only under an obligation to determine an application if High Speed 2 Limited have provided sufficient information in support of it. And as Ian has just indicated, in this particular case, sufficient information has been provided, and therefore it would be entirely legitimate for the subcommittee to determine this application, and that would be wholly consistent with the Court of Appeal's judgment. I just think it's important to mention that because we now have to read the Act as it stands, but there is also now a definitive court ruling from the second highest court in the land, which we mustn't lose sight of, and which was actually in our favour as well. So I just wanted to say that as a preface. So just going back to this particular application, there is a legal requirement that development consisting of building works, which are works other than temporary in nature, which are the responsibility of High Speed 2 Limited, must be carried out in accordance with plans and specifications approved by the Council. The recommendation in the report is to approve High Speed 2 Limited's application with an informal, non-standard informative to be imposed, which Ian has already drawn your attention to. The application can only be refused on one or more of the usual statutory grounds set out in paragraph 2 of Schedule 17. I won't bore you with them, but you'll be familiar with them now. They are, the grounds are that the design or external experience of the building works ought to be modified and are capable of being modified to preserve local environment, prevent or reduce prejudicial effects on road safety, and to preserve a site of archaeological or historic interest. You'll be familiar with those grounds now, and none of those apply in this particular case. And on that basis, it would be entirely legitimate and indeed lawful for members of the subcommittee to approve this application.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Raj. Okay, we can now throw the debate open to members. I can see Councillor Oswald and Councillor Duncan indicating. So, Councillor Oswald.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, it's a good report, actually. It's a good, solid report. I don't have a problem with this. What I am pleased about is on page 15, it says that future ownership and maintenance falls firmly in the lap of HS2 and not us. And I think that's only a good thing. I think, well, I've already said the report's good, and I'm pleased that this is happening. That's it for me, Chairman. I'm quite happy to move the officer's recommendations.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Oswald. I've also seen Councillor Morgan and Councillor Lavery indicating, but we'll go to Councillor Duncan, who indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to second it, but I would just like that, because obviously it's needed, but I would just like to understand a little bit more about it. Is this going to be, presumably this is going to be built before the Jews Farm buildings are demolished? Is that the case? And if so, do we need to have a condition to that effect? And also, I noticed that there are two types of bat in the Jews Farm buildings. And when we saw the photograph, there seemed to be a number of buildings there. Are they in separate buildings? In which case, we're only providing one. Would the species tend to just go to different parts of the building that is being proposed? I mean, I'm happy with it. I'm not voting against it. I'm seconding it. But I would just like further information about how this actually works, please. Thank you.
Okay, Ian, so there's two points there raised by Councillor Duncan, one on the timescales in relation to the construction and demolition of the previous buildings, and a further point there around the species of bat and the volumes of bats where they are. So can you pick those points up?
Yes, certainly, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Duncan. So, in first instance, the timing. The bat house is going to be constructed almost immediately as soon as they get permission. I understand that the Jews Farm cottages are going to be demolished towards the beginning of next year. However, in relation to the second point, it's quite an important point. Is that it's not the bats moving from the Jews cottages to the bat house. It's not as straightforward as that for obvious reasons. The bat house is to offset the harm to bat populations as a consequence of the HS2 project. Jews cottages will at some point be demolished. The bat house will be constructed. So it is not a like-for-like replacement as such, but it is to offset the harm to bat populations. So the bat populations within Jews cottages will do what they do best afterwards, move to another part of the woods or fly away to another area. The bat house will be constructed and will be of a benefit to new bat populations. So it's not as straightforward as a like-for-like replacement as such. It is to offset the harm of HS2. So I do believe it is a suitable and appropriate form of mitigation. I also think it should be an educational resource in due course. We don't normally get a structure of this size or this nature designed specifically for bats, so that should be of benefit to the borough and to those studying bat populations in the area. But it is not a like-for-like replacement as such. It's to offset the harm of those cottages and the works of HS2.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Councillor Duncan, are you okay with that?
Sort of. I mean, I do understand the point because it's a point of principle, but what we're actually dealing with are points of fact, because these are bats that are there, and it would seem to me that yes, you should put this building up, because when all the activity goes on in demolishing, if they're going to demolish them early next year, it would be handy if this was present, because then it would be within easy reach of that. It just would seem to me to be a sensible thing to do, of a practical nature. But I understand that we're not able to put that in as a condition or an informative. Is that right? We're not able to do that.
Ian,
I mean, technically, we could condition the proposals to make sure that they're constructed in accordance with that time frame. So this is built prior to the demolition of Jews' cottages. One of the reasons why it was put in for submission when it was to try and get it in time for bat hibernation season, which is pretty much upon us now. So that's the window that they have to get this constructed to. So there's been a bit of pressure to approve this. There was a delay in the process because of a lack of information at one point, as Raj referenced the appeal in relation to securing better information, which was eventually provided. But the aim is to get this built in time for bat hibernation season, which is upon us. So that's the reason why we brought it to this committee. As I said, I think linking it directly to the demolition of Jews' Cottage would not necessarily be the appropriate thing to do, because it's not a like replacement for that. It's to offset some of the harm to that. So we could, I suppose, condition it in relation to that timing, but I don't think it would be necessary or appropriate to do so, given the lack of direct link between the two structures.
Thank you for that. Well, if we're able to do it, I would like to do it, even if it's just in the form of an informative, because it just seems to me common sense to do that. And if it's bat hibernation period now, presumably when they demolish Jews Farm buildings where they are located now, that's not going to be during the hibernation period, because the protective legislation wouldn't allow them to do that. So if permission is granted this evening and then they can go out and start building this tomorrow, then hopefully the building is going to be there anyway. And if the bats don't go there, because you can't make them go there, that's a whole issue beyond anybody's control. But if it is there, it seems to me eminently sensible to have it available within the area that they know and where they're used to living and foraging. And if they can just move straight in, great. So I think even if we could just put it as an informative, that I think would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Duncan. Take your point. I think there's Councillor Morgan and Councillor Lavery have indicated. So, Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just looking through this, Natural England have got no objections to this. I'm very happy with the officer's recommendations on this and have nothing more to add to it. And let's move on.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Councillor Lavery.
I was going to withdraw my request to speak because I'm perfectly happy with it and it's been proposed and seconded. I am relaxed as to whether we add another informative, but I wouldn't wish to complicate the process particularly.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I mean, any other views on the informative suggested by Councillor Duncan? Any particular views for it? I mean, I'll take Councillor Lavery's point. We don't want to overcomplicate the application, and I'll ask for Ian and Raj to think whether we can weave that in. But is there an appetite for that? Just maybe a thumbs up or a nod or. Okay. Ian, Raj, any views on whether we can add this in?
Shall I go first? I see no reason why we couldn't impose a second informative, but members do need to understand that it is an informal process and it can't be enforced in the same way that a condition can. I'd also advise members that there are no legal grounds for imposing a condition in this particular instance, because you cannot link the erection of the bat house to the demolition of the cottages, because the grounds for imposing a condition are essentially the same as those for refusal under paragraph 2 of Schedule 17, and that says that the grounds are designed. It's whether the design or external appearance of the bat house ought to be modified, and there's no evidence in the report to suggest that is needed. So my clear legal advice is that whilst there are grounds, if members wish, to impose an informative, but on the understanding that it cannot be enforced, there are no legal grounds for imposing a condition in this particular case because the statutory grounds are not satisfied.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Raj. I'm going to ask Ian to come in, but I've seen Councillor Brightman indicate.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to say, if it's just going to legally complicate things, it might be best to not put an informative in.
Councillor Hagger, you had your hand up there.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just really for whatever is the easiest way, and if it's not going to make any difference whether it's in there or not, which is what I'm understanding, I think, from everyone, that we could put it in, but it's not going to make any difference, then I suppose what I'm saying is then it doesn't need to be added in. And I see it's only important if it does make a difference to the paper, in simple terms.
Yeah. Okay, I'm getting a sense from members, and now that there's a mood not to add an informative, I think so we could move on from that. I think it'd be nice to put it in, but I think I'm getting a sense that it wouldn't be this committee's desire to add an informative. Okay, I'm getting lots of indications here. Okay, right. I've got no other councillors indicating they wish to speak. I am moved. I am seconded. So I'm going to take this application to the vote now. So I'm going to start with Councillor Lavery.
For, please.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brightman.
For, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hagger.
For, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
For, Mr. Chairman.
And I've got Councillor Duncan, who seconded, and Councillor Oswald, who moved the recommendation. So I make that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for approval. Is that correct, Liz?
That's correct, Chairman.
Okay, so I can confirm that agenda item 6 this evening is approved. Okay, right, let's move on to the second item this evening, item 7, which is the between the River Colne and the Grand Union Canal north of Denham Lock in Uxbridge. So, Ian, can you present agenda item 7 to the committee this evening, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Just going to start the presentation now. Can you see that, Chairman?
Yep, it's come up lovely, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so this is an application for bringing into use under paragraph 9 of Schedule 17 of the High Speed Act, and it relates to the diversion of the National Grid overhead power line works in Colne Valley. And it relates to work 2/4B, which I shall just read out from the Act. It is a temporary bridge over the River Colne commencing at a point 200 metres northeast of the junction of footpath DEN/20/2 and DEN/20/1 with bridleways DEN/48/2 and terminating at a point 134 metres northeast of its commencement. So this is a scheduled work. This means this was approved by Parliament to go to be put into place. Now, this is a bit of an oddity of a proposal that's before this committee. As Raj mentioned in the last application, Schedule 17 is required for most built structures, except where they're temporary in nature. So if this wasn't a scheduled work, this would not be before the committee. It's only before the committee because it's scheduled work, and scheduled works have to come towards the local planning authority before they are brought into use. And that is very important, not before they're constructed, but before they are brought into use. As it is a temporary work, there is no prior consent required by this council for the construction of this works. So it's only relating to the bringing into use of it, and that is very important. to remember as we go through the presentation. So here it is, roughly located by the red circle, the River Colne. It crosses River Colne, which is the border of Buckinghamshire Council, as it is now known, and the London Borough of Hillingdon. So this bridge is going to span the River Colne, and it is the eastern abutments and the bridge structure that crosses into the London Borough of Hillingdon that is for committee's consideration tonight. The western abutment is for Buckinghamshire Council, who I believe have already approved it. In a bit more detail, it is a fairly sizable structure. There's no getting away from that. It is required for pylon realignment works, which I'll just come on to in a bit more detail. So it is a fairly hefty structure requiring large goods vehicles carrying larger elements of the pylon, which is basically a sort of Meccano fixed kit, which comes in parts and then it is constructed on site. But those parts are fairly substantial, along with the other machinery and equipment required to install a pylon. So it is a sizable structure, but it is a temporary structure. Although the footings on either side are to be of concrete, those footings will be removed when the temporary bridge is removed as in the requirements of the Act. I'll come on to that in a bit more detail. Just a bit more detail about the abutments, particularly on the eastern side. There's a fair amount of vegetation to be removed, but in the grand scheme of things, considering there's a viaduct not too far away, the impacts of this bridge are relatively small, although they are self-evidently not nothing. So for the context, this is the realignment. You can see the current realignment is the black line with the dots going across the Hoack Lake and then running alongside the Grand Union Canal going southwards. The realignment is the new blue line, and it's being realigned so that you can get clearance above the new high-speed rail network. And it is going to just skirt through the edge of the north of Uxbridge Golf Course and across Lake number 3 and across the Grand Union Canal. And you'll see where the number 48 is on the screen. That's the pylon work that was going to be facilitated by this bridge. So the bridge, roughly just south of that, the number 48 on there, will require a construction road from the bridge to that pylon. The construction road is not a scheduled work and is therefore not before the committee tonight. So in relation to bringing into use under Schedule 17, it's not the same as an earthworks or structure application, as I mentioned. It is about bringing the scheduled work into use after it's been constructed. Planning Forum Note 7, that's the guidance documents provided by HS2 Limited to describe exactly what types of applications are, defines bringing into use approvals as the purpose of bringing into use approvals is to ensure that the nominated undertaker for the work takes all reasonably practicable measures for the mitigation of that work. So that, as stated previously, there is no prior consent required before construction, and temporary works do not normally require consent. The archaeological impacts dealt with through the application of environmental requirements, because that is a pre-construction matter. The Environment Agency are required to give their consent under Schedule 33 for the river flow, which they have done. So the Environment Agency has satisfied that this work will not impact on the flow of the river or increase the risk of flooding. Information required to enable the council to determine that all mitigation has and or will be employed to offset the harm needs to be provided. And that's important because some of these bring into use applications could be submitted during construction or indeed even after construction, but before a work is actually brought into use and operable. So as stated, cannot stress this enough, only the bring into use of the bridge is being consented tonight, and in particular, the mitigation for this bridge. As a consequence, there are two fundamental concerns with this: ecological impacts as a result of the eastern abutment, and also the water conveyance and the flood risk associated with that. So in relation to the ecology, the actual loss of the ecological ecology on the side of the bank. That will be eventually restored when the bridge is taken out and will form part of the wider restoration of the HS2 project. Now, at this stage, we haven't got details of that work, so I can't tell you exactly where the small planting related to this bridge will go, but there is scope for that mitigation to be provided at a later date. The council is seeking for a comprehensive ecological restoration around the Colne Valley, which would include parts of this bridge, but also linked to the Colne Valley Viaduct, which itself is obviously a far greater piece of engineering and a far greater impact. So we want a holistic approach to that, of which this will form part of it. What we do have before us, again, as Raj mentioned in the previous one, sufficient information is now required for these. HS2 Limited didn't provide that originally, but through negotiations on the planning application eventually did. We now have a method statement as to how they intend to mitigate the harm of this bridge. We know that there's going to be plans for the restoration of the works in the area, and this site itself will be restored to something very similar to what it is now. This site, I have to stress that again, this site where the bridge is, we're not talking about the construction road, we're not talking about further works related to the pylon, we're talking about the impacts of the abutments of this bridge. And I'm satisfied that there is a restoration proposal in place and that the method statement would satisfy us that the ecological impacts are being managed related to this bridge. I understand that there is a lot of concern about the wider impacts of HS2 in the area in the Colne Valley, and I understand that, but before the committee tonight is this bridge and the abutments, particularly on the eastern bank. And to that regard, the information before us is satisfactory regarding the ecological impact. In turn to flood risk, the Environment Agency have raised no objections and satisfied that the scope of the works, there's a 5 metre setback from the top of the riverbank for the bridge abutments, and the soffit, the underside of the bridge, is a minimum of 35.63 metres AOD, therefore outside the flooding area. So in combination with the fact that there's very few sensitive receptors in the area, again, the council and the officers do not believe that there is any flood risk related to this site. So in regards to the matters under Schedule 17, officers do not believe that the impacts are of a great deal that have not been mitigated. In fact, the officers believe that the mitigation proposed by HS2 Limited and the applicant are sufficient to offset the harm of bringing into use this work. So consequently, the recommendation is for approval, subject to the informative similar to the one on the previous application, and very importantly, that the works proceed in accordance with the method statement. So what we're doing there is we're approving this scheme subject to the method statement. We're effectively bringing that method statement into the enforcement powers of this local planning authority. So if they do not comply with it, we have responsibilities under the Act to ensure that enforcement can be carried out. So that's the recommendation, Chairman. That's the presentation finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ian, and thank you for taking us through, again, a complex series of legislative issues. I'm going to ask Raj to come in and just give his views before I open it up to members, and I've already seen a couple have indicated. So.
Okay, thank you once again, Chairman. I won't repeat what I said earlier about the Court of Appeals ruling. Obviously, enough information has to be submitted before this subcommittee, and Ian has confirmed that is the case. So on the basis of all the information which you have before you this evening, everything points to the fact that the bridge in question is of a temporary nature. It's been described as such in Schedule 1 of the High Speed 2 Act, which was approved by Parliament, and everything in the officer report before you and in Ian's presentation as well indicates that this bridge is of a temporary nature. If it later transpires that the bridge is intended to be a permanent structure, then it would have been misdescribed in Schedule 1. And at that point, the council, as local planning authority, would be able to take enforcement action under its powers under the Town and Country Planning Act. So it's not as if High Speed 2 Limited are going to get away, if you like, with it if they have misdescribed the nature of this bridge. I think it's important to make this particular point, because I understand that a letter has been sent to all members of the subcommittee indicating that the bridge may be of a permanent nature rather than a temporary one. And I think it ought to be, I think my advice on that point needs to be recorded for the benefit of the subcommittee. I mean, having said all of that, I do believe this is a straightforward application. It's governed by paragraph 9 of Schedule 17 of the Act. I believe that there has been one previous application of this nature, which was considered by the subcommittee. Paragraph 9 sets out two situations where the council must approve the application. The relevant situations in this case is that there are no reasonably practicable measures for mitigating the effect on the environment or local amenity that need to be taken into account. And in the body of the report, officers have clearly stated that no such reasonably practicable measures need to be taken by High Speed 2 Limited in this case. Paragraph 9 also sets out the statutory grounds on which the application can legitimately be refused, and they are the usual culprits, you know, reasonably capable of being modified, etc. I don't think I need to read all that again. I think members of the subcommittee are well familiar now with the wording in the statute. All I need to say is that no grounds for refusal exist in this particular case. So once again, the recommendation in the report is to approve High Speed 2 Limited's application with one informal, non-standard informative to be imposed. And my legal advice to members of the subcommittee is that it's entirely lawful for members to agree this particular recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raj. Okay, we've heard quite a lot of information there from both Ian and Raj. I'm going to throw this open for debate. I've already had councillors indicate, and Councillor Morgan, you got in very early, followed by Councillor Lavery and Councillor Duncan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm quite happy with this report, but I just want officers' thoughts and comments about having a condition. Normally when we have temporary buildings being put up, we normally give a lifespan for that temporary building. And I'm just wondering, is it feasible or possible to put a condition that says that gives a time span for this temporary bridge? Other than that, I'm very happy to go with officers' recommendations.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Morgan. Ian, timescales for the temporary nature of the bridge?
I'm not sure that that would be allowed for in the Act, Chairman. The submission is based on the fact that it is temporary, and the submitted information relates to 15 months. I believe in approving the scheme based on the information that's presented as approving the fact that it's a temporary bridge. I would defer to Raj as to his belief as to whether or not we can actually put a condition in specific to that, because I don't believe it's covered by the requirements of the Act. Raj, if you're happy to, for me to pass the buck.
Yes, I'm happy to come in. I think that Councillor Morgan's point is well made. But again, my view is that I think we would find it hard to justify the imposition of a condition, because we would have to be satisfied that it's expedient to do so on the ground that the scheme ought to be modified to either preserve the local environment or local amenity, to preserve a site of archaeological or historical interest, or in the interests of nature conservation. And there is actually no evidence before the subcommittee tonight that any of those particular factors apply in this particular case. Members of the subcommittee will be aware that when they deal with other reports where conditions are recommended on an approval, there usually is considerable detail and text in the report setting out why there is justification for the imposition of a condition. and no such dialogue or text exists in this particular instance. So I would have a legal concern if conditions were to be sought to be imposed in this particular case in the absence of that information.
Thank you, Raj. Councillor Morgan, you okay with that? Okay, good. Councillor Lavery. I think you're still on mute. Councillor Lavery, that's it. We can hear you now.
Thank you, Chairman. We've heard a very clear presentation from the officer, and we've had very clear legal advice as to where we stand with this application. As is usual with HS2, and those of us who do wider planning work, would love to do all sorts of things and get all sorts of assurances, and I share Councillor Morgan's desire, to tie them in more tightly. But I also understand that the Act ties us up fairly tightly. The clear legal advice we have is that this is a temporary bridge and under the Act, and that therefore the council does have powers if it becomes something else. I accept its construction may suggest other things, but I think we've got to take it before what it is. I also understand the Act is very clear that they can be constructed before they have to come to us, and this is a schedule for bringing it into use. I don't think we've got any grounds to refuse this in the scheme of things. We couldn't show that it has to go somewhere else. So I think we've got to go with the report as presented. I think Councillor Morgan was indicating he was proposing the report, and I would be more than happy to second, because it is what it is. Thank you. Chairman, I think you're on mute now.
I am. I've just had the cursor of the mute button there. Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Councillor Duncan, you indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think we can see that it is a substantial bridge, but as we've been told by officers, this is for carrying the parts for erecting a pylon, so it's got to be substantial, it's got to carry substantial loads. That doesn't mean that it's going to be a permanent structure. I see the report says that it's proposed to be used for 15 months, and presumably if it goes a great deal longer after that time, then we could start to think that maybe it isn't a temporary structure, and there could be discussions about it then. There's just one point. In the report, it proposes one non-standard informative, but in the presentation, Mr. Thine, I think, said that there was another proposed about that it should be constructed in line with the method statement. And I just wondered then if there are one or two informatives. If he could just clarify that point, please, but I'm happy to go with this. Thank you.
Okay. Ian, can you pick that point up for us?
Yes, Chair. It's a good point, Councillor Duncan. Sorry for the confusion that may have proposed. It is one informative. The reason for putting that last section in is because I think it was very important to point out to the committee that the method statement is being brought into line with the details being submitted as part of this application. So you might recall from previous submissions that HS2 Limited provide information for approval and information for information. The reason I pointed that out is because I'm proposing that is brought in for approval. So by approving that method statement, we are approving the mitigation. So therefore, the works have to be carried out in accordance with that method statement. So that's why I put it up there, because I think it's a very important point. It's for approval, that scheme. And if they don't comply with it, then that's when I think we can take enforcement action.
Right. Councillor Duncan, you okay with that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I'm not seeing anybody else indicate, so I think we can now take this to the vote. So we will go that way. Councillor Lavery, you seconded. So Councillor Brightman?
For, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hagger?
For, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan moved. So Councillor Duncan?
For, Chairman.
Thank you. And Councillor Oswell?
Yeah, for.
Okay, thank you. Right, Liz, I make that 6 out of 6 for approval.
That's correct, Chairman. Yes.
Okay, so I can confirm this evening agenda item 7 is approved. Okay, that actually brings us to the end of the applications this evening, so I can bring proceedings to a close and thank anybody watching at home on YouTube. Also to place on record my thanks to members this evening and officers supporting. So just good night, everybody.
Thank you very
Good
much.
night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you all. I'll stop
Thank
the
you,
streaming
thank
now.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night
you.
all.
Thank you.